This is a special edition of 10 News First.
Good evening, Narelda Jacobs with you. It's one of the most important federal budgets of our lifetime. And tonight, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg has revealed the depth of the economic damage caused by COVID-19. But also a plan the government hopes will pull Australia out of its first recession in 30 years. So let's get the detail. I'm joined by National Affairs Editor Hugh Riminton and Network Political Editor Peter Van Onselen. First to you, Hugh, who spent the day in the federal budget lockup. So what's in it?
Well, Narelda, what's in it is an astonishing pile of borrowed money, and the government is in there shelling the stuff out in a bid to protect your job, or if you've lost your job, to find a way of creating a new one for you. The Treasurer's argument is essentially a simple one. He says the nation's finances can't recover unless people are working.
I call the Treasurer.
A blowout budget for a bummer of a year.
In 2020, Australians have been tested like never before.
A coalition that came to power railing against
Labor's debt and deficit disaster
now just has one priority.
This budget is all about jobs.
The surpluses predicted in the last formal budget 18 months ago have been replaced by deficits falling through the floor. This year, a record $213 billion. Over 4 years, accumulated deficits topping $480 billion. Net government debt to reach almost $1 trillion in the next 4 years. $966,000 million, to be precise.
COVID-19 has resulted in the most severe global economic crisis since the Great Depression.
So what's new? The government will spend $4.9 billion paying businesses to hire young people, effective immediately $200 a week to hire someone under 30, $100 if the new hire is between 30 and 35.
And how many jobs do you think that's going to create?
Supporting 450,000, and these are people that we want to encourage to get back into the workforce.
Aged pensioners and others on family, carers and veterans benefits will get 2 extra one-off payments of $250, one in time for Christmas, the other in March. Income tax cuts are also being brought forward. If you earn between $50,000 to $90,000, that's an extra $20 a week you take home, plus an extra $1,080 when you lodge your tax return next year. If you earn $120,000 or more, you'll gain almost $50 a week. The changes backdated to July the 1st. All of that is certain to pass the Senate. Labor has already called for those tax cuts to be brought forward.
We will act consistent with that.
The politics are clear enough. The government is borrowing like never before to cushion us from an economic catastrophe that could be greater than the Great Depression. But the personal income tax cuts plainly only go to people in work. The government is hoping that those people take that money and spend it to generate jobs for others. There will be new help for people left psychologically scarred by this most difficult year.
What are you doing on mental health and why?
So there are some measures in there to double the number of psychological consultations you can get under Medicare from 10 to 20.
Why are you doing that?
Well, there's a need.
For older Australians struggling on waiting lists for in-home care,
Tonight, the Morrison government announces our largest single increase of 23,000 additional home care packages at a cost of $1.6 billion.
unemployment is set to peak at a lower than expected 8% in December, falling back to pre-COVID levels 5.5% by 2023-24. With economic growth roaring back to 4.75% in the coming financial year.
You're expecting a strong bounce back out of this in the next...
So too is the global economy. As you'll see in there, the global economy is expecting growth of 5% next year and also a bit higher in our major trading partners.
There are new breaks for business, $2 billion for extra tax incentives for research and development, full tax deductibility for business investments for the rest of this financial year, and tax loss carrybacks for small business. But the government admits there is one huge source of uncertainty the budget can't fix: the pandemic itself and the race to beat it.
Well, the assumption in the budget is that there will be a nationwide vaccine by the end of next year.
That work lies not with those in the blue suits, but the scientists in white coats working right now in laboratories all over the world. So the virus does remain the key to all of this. The Treasurer says if we have another blowout in infections in Australia, that could hit the budget deficit for another $50 billion. But if we get a vaccine a little earlier, say by the middle of next year, that could improve these published figures tonight by more than $30 billion. The Treasurer says there is an enormous amount of uncertainty around these budget figures. And Narelda, he's right.
Thanks, Hugh. Let's go to Network Political Editor Peter Van Onselen. Now, Peter, that's a lot of cash being splashed. You've been speaking with the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, about the record deficits. We're going to be suffering a hangover for years to come.
We certainly are. It's hard to know when, if ever, we're going to get rid of debt, much less get back to a surplus on the road towards that sort of recovery. You could have easily mistaken this for a Labor budget rather than a Liberal Party handing down a budget with a Liberal Treasurer. But I know that this wasn't a Wayne Swan budget because he never would have spent this much money. He didn't even come close during the GFC. I think most Australians can forgive the amount of debt being accumulated now because of the pandemic. The fascinating thing for me is the forward estimates, which just show debt after debt after debt. And that is where I started in my discussion with the Treasurer. Josh Frydenberg, thanks very much for your time.
Nice to be with you, PVO.
I don't think anyone would begrudge the amount of debt that's there for this particular period, given COVID. But 4 years from now, to have a deficit of around $67 billion, how do you justify that?
Well, the budget's been hit hard, not just on the payment side as a result of the necessary spending, but also on the receipt side.
But are we going to face hard decisions? I mean, this is a level of debt now, in comparative terms, not seen since post-World War II. But back then they had much higher marginal tax rates, they had death duties. Are hard decisions like that coming at some point?
Well, our pathway to paying down that debt is by growing the economy.
Well, what I'm really wondering is, do you think you'll ever be back in black during the rest of your political career?
I hope you enjoy your coffee. What I'm focused on, PVO, is ensuring that more Australians get into work.
But 4 years from now, 4 years from this pandemic, to have a $67 billion deficit, I reckon if you were in opposition, you would be saying that's not good enough if a Labor Treasurer delivered that.
Again, we have not baked in long-term spending, but the economic shock, PVO, that the Australian economy has faced, indeed that the global economy has faced, dwarfs the GFC and has required the type of fiscal response that we've provided. For example, JobKeeper. At $101 billion, no government has ever announced such a significant support package, and together with the other initiatives, saved some 700,000 jobs.
That's what Wayne Swan said around the GFC, and he was attacked without mercy from your side of politics.
Well, again, they spent money on pink bats, they baked in spending.
But Treasury also told them that they saved X number of jobs, and your side of politics disputed it. Now you're telling us that Treasury says you've saved X number of jobs, and you expect us to accept it.
Well, I can point you to the numbers, which showed that in the last month, the unemployment rate came down from 7.5 to 6.8%. That's the single biggest drop that we've seen in 30 plus years.
All of which I welcome, but I've got to ask you this. It's predicated on a vaccine, a lot of these numbers going forward. What are the chances, do you think, that come May next year, all that we've seen tonight goes out the window because the vaccine's not as advanced as you hope?
Well, this is the most uncertain economic climate that any Australian Treasurer has had to deal with, and we're hopeful of a vaccine. We're doing everything we can to secure a vaccine. Our researchers are doing everything they can to come up with a vaccine, but the reality is that only time will tell. There is a scenario in the budget that a vaccine becomes available earlier than the end of next year, and that will be a $34 billion boost to the Australian economy. There's also another scenario that we see another wave of cases like we've seen in Victoria, which would hurt the economy by $55 billion. So whichever way you look, there's a degree of uncertainty and unpredictability about the climate. What we have sought to do with tonight's budget is to chart a course for creating more jobs. And it's Treasury's estimate that up to 1 million new jobs can be created over the next few years as a result of our actions and as a result of what's happening across the broader Australian economy.
John Howard got debt back down to zero along with Peter Costello. Clearly that's not going to happen again in either of our lifetimes. But I ask you again,
Do you think you'll see a surplus budget at any point while you're still in politics?
Well, again, Peter, my focus is on the here and now.
Is that a no?
My focus is on the here and now. What I printed tonight in the budget papers is deficits for some years to come. My focus is about getting people back into jobs. That is how we will become a stronger economy. And if we get more people into jobs, we will get a stronger budget position as well.
Long way to go, Treasurer. We appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Always good to be with you.
Treasurer Josh Frydenberg there. Now, Hugh, back to you. What's the reaction been from industry groups, welfare representatives, other stakeholders?
Well, there's certainly some very positive noises coming out of business tonight. Things like tax loss carrybacks and temporary full expensing sound like foreign languages to most of us, but to business these can represent billions of dollars in extra help. The chief complaint around tonight is that most of the benefits, people are saying, are weighted towards people who are already in work and not directed towards those at the increasingly large economic fringes of society. Tegan George has been listening in.
It's meant to be a blues-busting budget.
It's what will give Australians hope and the opportunity to get ahead.
But there's disappointment. It largely favours people already in work.
If you're unemployed, you get nothing out of a tax cut. And even if you earn up to $20,000 a year, you get zero. And if you're on the minimum wage, you only get $2.11 a week.
We needed to see an emphasis on putting money in the hands of people who really needed it.
Australia has a shortfall of social housing of 433,000 properties.
The two cash payments worth $500 have the green light.
This is what we've called for, and we're pleased to see the government delivering more money to pensioners who both need it and will spend it into the economy.
But aged care advocates say the 23,000 extra home care packages are just a start.
The Royal Commission has heard that people are dying waiting for a home care package. This will only do a little bit to help what is a massive problem.
It won't be enough. We still have around about 50,000 people waiting for a home care package.
Big new tax breaks for business investment are scoring well.
You could call it accelerated depreciation on steroids. Will encourage businesses large and small to go out there, take risks, make the plunge, buy capital equipment.
The government has recognised that farmers, agriculture and rural and regional communities can help kickstart this economy.
But when the dust settles, there's still the debt. Tegan George for 10 News First.
PVO, what say the opposition?
The opposition are interesting on this because on the one hand they want to criticise the level of debt, you can understand that, but they're also critical of where the spending's going and they want more spending in some areas, and that is a difficult circle to square. Here's a little bit of what the Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers had to say.
If Labor was in power, would you have spent as much as this government during this pandemic?
Oh, we've always acknowledged that there is a role for the government to step in and support people's jobs. And support people's communities in a really difficult time like this. Our issue is with the effectiveness of this spend. It's quite remarkable that in this budget the government's racked up $1 trillion in debt, but there's still no long-term vision for the country.
So where should the debt be going if you're not happy with where it is?
Well, I'll give you one example. You think about the hiring subsidy that the government announced today. What they don't want people to know is that 928,000 Australian workers who are currently on unemployment benefits aren't even eligible for that hiring subsidy. That's clearly something which is concerning to us. There are issues in superannuation that we are worried about, and we'll take our time to work through the detail. But overall, there are some things we can support. The main issue we have is $1 trillion of debt without the bang for buck you'd expect.
And you'd also keep JobSeeker and JobKeeper higher than what they're leaving them. Where would you take money away to do all those things, or would you just have more debt?
Well, we've had a series of pork barrelling scandals. We've had a series of rorts. We've had a Liberal Party donor paid $30 million for a $3 million parcel of land.
But that's chump change compared to the billions we're talking.
But the point that we're making is the government's not good at spending this money effectively.
Are you comfortable with 4 years from now them projecting a deficit of $67 billion? It seems high.
Well, it remains to be seen. The budget actually has for 10 years quite sizable deficits. That's pretty remarkable when you consider that Morrison and Frydenberg said that they had already got the budget back into surplus. Clearly, that hasn't proven to be the case, and they need to explain that.
I asked the Treasurer this, I'll ask you, do you think you're going to ever see a surplus budget in your political career now?
Well, it's hard to imagine. It rests on the fact that we need to get this economy growing much faster in the recovery. We need to kickstart the recovery.
So if this was a Jim Chalmers, not a Josh Frydenberg budget, what would the centrepiece of it be?
Well, I think energy policy certainty is a big part of the story here. The lack of it's meant there hasn't been enough business
investment.
You
guys don't even have a target.
What's required here, when I talk to business right around Australia, what they really want is some stability in policy. They want to invest in cleaner and cheaper energy, but they're worried that the government's had 22 policies in the last 7 years. Nothing in the budget undoes the damage caused by that uncertainty.
Jim Chalmers, appreciate your time.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, once again, Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers there, speaking to Peter Van Onselen. PBO, before we go, any final thoughts?
What I think is really interesting about this, we've seen all the detail that's in the budget. Hugh outlined that in his package, and there is quite a bit of spending there. We've seen from the discussion with both the Treasurer and the Shadow Treasurer that debt is a problem and there's not really a solution to bringing that back together. But what we don't really know yet is how much major reform will come out of this budget. Winston Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. We'll see in the budgets to come if this government gets serious about major economic reform in a post-COVID Australia. Hugh, from your perspective, what really caught your attention in Budget 2020?
Well, PVO, it certainly proves that 2020 is a year when everything is turned upside down. Vast debt is now, it seems okay, at least according to this government. Bear in mind, there's going to be a federal election, possibly as soon as 12 months away, certainly 18 months away. The government wants to go into that election with unemployment figures going down quite plainly, and with growth back on the rebound. So it has to calculate, can it do enough to generate that growth, to get those jobs back in again? But bear in mind, 3.5 million Australians come off JobKeeper at the end of March. Will there be enough jobs to pick up those people who will desperately be needing them at that point? That will be the test of this budget. Back to you, Narelda.
Hugh Rimmington and Peter Van Onselen, otherwise known as the Professor and the Hack. Thank you for your time this evening. You've been watching our federal budget special. We'll have plenty more in Studio 10 tomorrow morning from 8 a.m, including an interview with the Prime Minister. And of course, you can catch all the details again on 10 News First from 5 p.m. For now, good night.